the long stretch of asphalt cutting through the dense Texas woods hides a chilling secret. Locals refuse to drive this winding path after the sun dips below the horizon. The thick canopy of oak trees blocks out the moonlight, leaving drivers entirely alone in the suffocating darkness. Those who brave the road rarely return unchanged. Shadows seem to stretch and twist along the edges of the pavement. For decades, tales have circulated about a lingering presence waiting in the pitch-black night. It is a lonely stretch known simply as the Road of Annie. The very name sends a shiver down the spines of the older residents who remember the tragedy. The isolated nature of this Texas highway makes it the perfect breeding ground for local legends. With no streetlights and no houses for miles, the heavy silence presses against the windows of passing cars. Drivers often report an overwhelming sense of dread washing over them as they cross the invisible threshold into her cursed domain. Before it became a place of nightmares, the road was just a quiet route connecting two small towns. In the 1950s, teenagers used the winding path as a secluded spot away from the watchful eyes of their parents. It was a place for stolen moments under the vast southern sky before the tragedy struck. The legend centers on a beautiful young woman named Annie who lived in the neighboring town. She was known for her bright smile and the elegant white dress she wore to the local dances. Annie had a gentle spirit and a trusting heart, which ultimately led her down that dark, desolate road one fateful evening. It was the night of the high school prom in the late spring of 1955. Annie attended the dance with a young man who had a reputation for a quick temper. After a heated argument broke out between them, she demanded he pull the car over, and she stepped out into the night. Stranded in the suffocating darkness, Annie began the long walk back toward the safety of town. The humid Texas air clung to her skin as the sound of crickets filled the heavy silence. She gathered the hem of her white dress, hoping a passing motorist might offer her a safe ride home before midnight arrived. The exact details of what happened next remain shrouded in mystery and sorrow. Sometime in the darkest hours of the morning, a pair of headlights swept across a horrifying scene. The lifeless body of Annie was found discarded in the tall weeds beside the asphalt, her beautiful white dress stained with the mud of the ditch. The authorities launched a thorough investigation, but the culprit was never brought to justice. The young man she had argued with claimed he drove away and left her safely on the shoulder without enough evidence to charge him. The case grew cold, leaving her grieving family without closure and her spirit restless in the woods. The tragedy left a permanent scar on the quiet community. The dirt road was eventually paved over, but the lingering sadness could not be buried beneath the fresh asphalt. Slowly, the teenagers stopped parking their cars along the shoulder. as eerie whispers began to replace the sounds of laughter in the dead of the night. A few years after the tragedy, the first unsettling report reached the local police station. A terrified truck driver arrived in town trembling and pale, claiming he had nearly struck a pedestrian. He described a pale young woman in a flowing white dress, standing motionless in the exact center of the desolate Texas highway. The driver swore he slammed on his brakes and closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable impact. When the screeching tires finally came to a halt, he rushed out of the cab to check on the victim. He found absolutely nothing but empty pavement and a chilling breeze rustling through the dark oak trees. Law enforcement dismissed the encounter as a trick of the exhausted mind. They suggested the long hours on the road had caused the driver to hallucinate in the darkness. However, within the span of a single year, 3 more independent witnesses came forward with nearly identical descriptions of the tragic girl in the white dress. Each account shared the same terrifying details that defied logical explanation. The woman would materialize from the dense tree line just as a vehicle rounded the sharpest curve. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the harsh glare of the headlights, while her sorrowful eyes remained fixed directly on the terrified driver behind the wheel. The encounters grew more frequent as the decades rolled on, turning the route into a notorious destination. Thrill seekers and amateur ghost hunters began traveling to the lonely Texas road, hoping to catch a glimpse of the restless phantom. Most left disappointed, but a few unlucky souls experienced horrors they would never fully articulate. One local legend speaks of a group of bold teenagers who parked their vehicle near the spot of her demise. They turned off their engine and headlights, daring the spirit to reveal herself in the darkness. For several minutes, only the sound of their nervous breathing broke the absolute silence of the surrounding deep woods. Suddenly, the temperature inside the vehicle plummeted, turning their breath into visible white mist. A dense fog rolled across the hood of the car, obscuring the surrounding trees. The driver frantically reached for the ignition key, but his hand froze as a pale face slowly pressed against the glass of the passenger side window. The ghostly visage belonged to a young woman with hollow eyes and matted dark hair. She stared through the glass with an expression of profound sorrow mixed with a simmering rage. Her delicate hands left frosty prints on the window pane as she silently pleaded with the terrified occupants of the frozen metal trap. The driver finally managed to start the engine and slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. The tires spun wildly in the loose gravel before catching the solid pavement. As they sped away from the suffocating fog, the teenagers looked back to see the glowing white figure standing alone in the center of the road. The legend of the road evolved from a simple ghost story into a terrifying warning for late-night travelers. Locals learned to lock their doors and avoid looking into their rearview mirrors when passing through the dense woods. The phantom girl in white became an inescapable part of the cultural fabric of the surrounding region. Not all who encounter her are seeking a thrill in the darkness. Many witnesses are simply tired commuters making their way home after a grueling second shift. These innocent travelers often experience the most profound and terrifying interactions with the wandering spirit because they are completely unprepared for the supernatural assault on their rational minds. A weary traveling salesman once recounted his chilling experience on a stormy autumn night. The heavy rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see the painted lines on the dark pavement. He drove at a cautious crawl, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned completely white in the tense silence. Through the rhythmic wiping of the blades, he spotted a solitary figure walking along the muddy shoulder. Assuming it was a stranded motorist in desperate need of assistance, he slowed his vehicle to a gentle stop. He rolled down his passenger window to call out into the relentless storm, hoping to offer a warm refuge. The figure turned toward the sound of his voice and stepped into the glow of the headlights. It was a young woman, completely soaked by the torrential downpour. She wore a vintage white dress that clung tightly to her fragile frame. Her raven hair fell across her pale face, obscuring her sorrowful, unblinking dark eyes. The salesman urged her to climb inside the warm cabin to escape the freezing rain. Without uttering a single word, she opened the heavy door and slid gracefully onto the passenger seat. An unnatural cold immediately flooded the interior of the car, cutting through the blasting heat of the vents like a sharp winter blade. He asked for her destination, but the strange passenger remained completely silent. She sat entirely motionless, staring straight ahead through the water-slicked windshield. Assuming she was simply in deep shock from the freezing storm, the kind man decided to drive her toward the nearest town where he could find proper medical help for her. The drive continued in a heavy, oppressive silence that made the salesman increasingly uncomfortable. He cast nervous glances at the young woman, noticing that she left no wet impressions on the upholstery despite her soaked garments. He also realized, with a jolt of pure terror, that her chest did not rise and fall with breath. As the faint glow of the town limits finally appeared on the horizon, he turned to reassure her. The comforting words died violently in his throat. The passenger seat was completely empty. The heavy door was still securely locked from the inside. Yet the mysterious girl in the wet white dress had simply vanished entirely. The panicked man slammed on his brakes and searched the empty cabin in utter disbelief. He reached out to touch the fabric of the seat and found it completely dry, but as cold as a block of solid ice. A single delicate silver locket lay abandoned on the floor mat, glinting in the dim light. He brought the locket to the local police station, trembling as he recounted his bizarre tale. The older desk sergeant listened with a grim expression before opening a dusty filing cabinet. He pulled out a faded missing persons report from 1955, confirming the locket perfectly matched the one worn by the murdered girl. Encounters like the disappearing passenger have cemented the terrifying legacy of the road. The phantom seems bound to the endless ribbon of asphalt, endlessly repeating the tragic moments of her final night. Some paranormal experts believe she is desperately searching for the man who abandoned her to the deep shadows of the unforgiving Texas woods. Others claim her restless spirit is filled with a vengeful fury toward anyone who travels alone at night. They point to the unusually high number of unexplained accidents that occur along this specific stretch of highway. Vehicles mysteriously lose power, steering wheels lock up, and brakes fail without any mechanical reason, resulting in devastating crashes. One of the most violent confrontations with the entity occurred in the late 1990s. A cynical local mechanic was driving his heavy tow truck down the winding path after finishing a late night recovery job. He scoffed at the ghostly rumors, considering himself far too pragmatic to believe in fairy tales or lingering spirits. His skepticism was shattered when his massive diesel engine sputtered and died without any warning. The heavy truck coasted to a silent halt, surrounded by the towering trees. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and stepped out into the oppressive darkness, fully intending to diagnose a simple mechanical failure beneath the hood of his stalled vehicle. As he lifted the heavy metal hood, a sudden drop in temperature sent a painful chill through his greasy coveralls. The beam of his flashlight flickered wildly before dying, completely leaving him in absolute darkness. From the pitch-black woods, he heard the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping beneath the weight of deliberate approaching footsteps. He fumbled blindly in his pocket for a spare light while calling out to the unseen intruder. A soft, mournful weeping echoed from the tree line, sending a spike of pure adrenaline straight into his heart. The weeping slowly twisted into a dark, bitter laugh that seemed to echo from every direction in the woods. The moon briefly emerged from behind a thick cloud, casting a pale silver glow across the asphalt. Standing mere inches from his face was the gruesome manifestation of the murdered girl. Her pristine white dress was now violently torn and heavily soaked in dark crimson blood, reflecting the horrific reality of her brutal, violent end. The mechanic stumbled backward, dropping his useless flashlight onto the pavement. The phantom drifted forward, her feet hovering just above the ground. She raised a pale, decaying hand toward his face, and her jaw dropped open in a silent, agonizing scream. The air pressure dropped violently, causing a sharp, ringing pain deep inside his ears. Pure survival instinct finally overpowered his paralyzing fear. He scrambled blindly back into the cab of his heavy truck and locked the heavy doors. The supernatural entity slammed her fists against the sturdy glass, leaving massive webs of cracks across the windshield. The mechanic closed his eyes and prayed for deliverance from the furious spirit. Miraculously, the powerful diesel engine roared back to life on its own accord. The mechanic shoved the transmission into gear and floored the accelerator, tearing away from the terrifying apparition. When he finally reached the safety of the illuminated garage, he found his fractured windshield covered in dozens of small, frost-bitten, bloody handprints. He never drove down that cursed highway again, choosing to take a detour that added an hour to his daily commute. His terrifying experience served as a grim reminder that the restless entity was not just a sorrowful victim seeking a ride home. She was a powerful, volatile force trapped in a cycle of endless suffering. Modern technology has done absolutely nothing to deter the haunting of the road. In recent years, drivers equipped with dashboard cameras have captured bizarre anomalies while passing through the desolate area. The footage often reveals strange orbs of pale light darting across the dark pavement, or distorted figures standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. One piece of viral footage shows a massive white blur rushing toward a moving vehicle before completely enveloping the camera lens in static. The terrified driver reported that his digital radio immediately switched to a dead frequency, loudly broadcasting the sound of a woman crying just before the electrical system entirely failed in the darkness. Despite the undeniable danger, a steady stream of curious visitors continues to brave the lonely Texas highway. They bring digital recorders and thermal cameras, hoping to document undeniable proof of the afterlife. The local authorities have erected numerous warning signs urging motorists to maintain a safe speed and remain inside their vehicles at all times. The physical landscape of the road itself seems to reflect the dark energy of the haunting. The twisted oak trees lean heavily over the pavement, creating a suffocating tunnel of dead branches. Thick patches of unnatural fog routinely settle in the lowest dips of the road, blinding drivers and perfectly concealing the wandering, tragic phantom. Some residents argue that the spirit is tied directly to the exact patch of dirt where her life was so brutally stolen. They believe she will never find eternal peace until the lost identity of her wicked killer is finally revealed to the world. Until that impossible day arrives, her tormented soul remains permanently anchored. The legend serves as a dark cautionary tale passed down through generations of Texas families. Parents strictly warn their teenage children to avoid the winding, isolated path after dusk. The simple story of a stranded girl has grown into a towering myth of supernatural vengeance that continues to cast a long, dark shadow over the community. For those who have witnessed the haunting firsthand, the trauma lingers long after the encounter. The freezing cold temperatures the scent of old, decaying rainwater, and the overwhelming wave of absolute despair are permanently burned into their memories. They know the undeniable truth that monsters do not hide under beds, but wait beside quiet roads. As the midnight hour approaches, the lonely stretch of asphalt becomes a threshold between the living world and the realm of the dead. The nocturnal wildlife goes entirely silent, refusing to disturb the sacred, tragic ground. Only the gentle whistling of the Texas wind remains, carrying the faint echo of a desperate, sorrowful final plea. If you ever find yourself driving through the deep southern woods late at night, pay close attention to the shifting shadows. Should a sudden, unnatural frost bloom across your windshield, resist the powerful urge to pull over. Keep your trembling hands firmly on the wheel and your terrified eyes locked on the long, dark path ahead. Never look toward the dark tree line, and absolutely never glance into your rearview mirror. If you see a pale young woman in a flowing white dress standing in the beams of your headlights, do not slow your vehicle. She is not searching for a friendly ride back to town, but seeking a companion in eternity. The haunting of the cursed road will continue as long as the asphalt cuts through those ancient woods. Her restless spirit demands to be seen by those who dare to cross into her dark, desolate territory. The girl in white remains an eternal prisoner of the night, forever waiting for a salvation that will simply never arrive.